Hurrying to catch her flight, the doctor swapped seats with the fortune teller and moved to economy class. And just as she was about to step onto the plane, she touched the woman's hand. Wow! Could it be true that I was actually voted for and I'm flying to this symposium? But who would have thought they'd choose me over Carla? Usually, only the chief doctor's relatives attend such events. Marge stretched her legs with pleasure and settled comfortably into her seat. It was her first time flying business class, even though she had been a surgeon for many years and was well regarded in her field. And now, such luck! She was eager to learn more about the new opportunities in early-stage diagnostics. Innovative technologies never failed to amaze her each year. Of course, not every innovation was worth implementing, and most were too expensive, but still, there was always something useful to be found. Every improvement saved lives. What had that arrogant Carla said to her before the board meeting, where everything would be decided? That her uncle, Brad, the chief doctor, had already made the decision. That Marge shouldn't even dream of it. In fact, Carla had suggested she just give up on the idea of even contending for the trip. But Marge would never do that, even though her husband was against it. He had said that these board meetings were only for one purpose, to change things. Where had such nonsense come from in his mind? They had been married for almost 5 years, and Marge had never given him any reason to doubt her. She even began to worry, maybe her husband had started an affair on the side? Jealous people most often cheat themselves. Everyone knows that. And yet, she would never refuse this trip. She had dreamed about it so much. When half of the staff voted for her main rival Carla to go, Marge had already despaired. She expected the others to also flatter the chief doctor in that way, but then an unexpected turn of events occurred. She was supported by the department heads, nurses, and even the janitor. The votes were split evenly. It was fortunate that Alistair, the orderly, ran in on his day off. His vote turned out to be decisive. How angrily Carla's supporters looked at him. They even escorted him to the corridor to talk. They tried to persuade him to change his mind, but Alistair wasn't afraid of anyone and didn't give in. Marge herself heard Carla hiss at him in the corridor. Well, now get ready for problems. Look who's honest now. You should have used your head and not stood up for just anyone. By just anyone, Carla meant Marge. Carla still refused to acknowledge that her colleague had more experience and talent. Besides, Marge wasn't afraid of work, didn't leave half an hour before the end of the workday, didn't pass on difficult patients to others out of fear of responsibility. Carla knew that her uncle would give her a bonus anyway and overlook everything. On one hand, she was lucky to have the chief doctor in her family. But on the other hand, it didn't give her a chance to develop professionally. But Carla didn't understand that. She believed she deserved only the best and the most promising. The voice over the intercom announced that it was time to prepare for takeoff, and the helpful flight attendant added that right after this, they could order drinks and have lunch. Carla thought that it was indeed business class, and flying was much more comfortable. Spacious seats were worth it. No need to compete with neighbors for armrests or go to the bathroom, disturbing two people. The aisles were such that you could get up at any moment without any problems. Moreover, there were far fewer people here, and thus, much more air. No one would recline their seat into your lap when you fall asleep. Marge herself would never pay so much for this comfort. Her salary wasn't that high. She would have to give it all up for just one such flight. Maybe even more. But this trip and the hotel accommodation were paid for by her work, so why not feel like, for the only time in her life, a slightly wealthier person? An interesting experience. The plane shook, her ears felt a bit clogged. They handed out packets in case someone felt ill, but Marge tolerated flights well even in economy class, so she wasn't worried. In such a throne, she definitely wouldn't feel bad. Suddenly, she heard screams from economy class, which was right behind the curtain, very close. Help, is there a doctor? Someone is feeling ill. Marge jumped up and ran toward the cry. Such is her profession. Doctors are always needed, everywhere, even if they are flying for their own personal reasons. It's more than a profession. Continuous service mode. I'm a doctor. Who here is feeling ill? She was pointed to a plump, elderly woman in an exotic, colorful, long skirt with a gray bun. Her wrinkled hands were adorned with rings featuring semi-precious stones. The woman sat with half-closed eyes. When Marge leaned over her, the woman whispered, "I'm just overweight, and there's another passenger next to me who's the same." She pointed to a large man who was almost crushing the elderly lady as she squeezed into her seat. "And up front, someone has sprayed something very strong. I can't tolerate smells well. Don't worry. It's not deadly. You know, judging by your wheezing, you still have asthma. Let's do this. Let's swap seats. After all, this is my first and last time flying business class. So, there's no point in getting used to it." Marge explained that she had ended up with such a ticket by chance. Simply by some coincidence, there were no others left. Otherwise, she would have definitely taken a seat in economy. "But don't you feel bad?" the stranger asked, surprised. "No, of course not. You can only pity people. And a bit more comfort or less, well, that's not where happiness lies," Marge replied. "Thank you so much. Honestly, I thought I was going to die here." "My name is Antoinette," the elderly woman introduced herself. "Well, nice to meet you." "I'm Marge," the doctor responded in turn. "Oh, that was my daughter's name. Sad story." Antoinette immediately sank back. It was clear that heavy memories had overwhelmed her, but she still accepted Marge's help with immense gratitude and said she would never forget it. "It's nothing, really." The fragile Marge comfortably settled next to her hefty neighbor and thought, there are advantages to weighing only 60 kilograms, or even less. And she wasn't tall. As for the strong perfume of the lady sitting in front, you don't get used to that even during a hospital examination. If you can't tolerate something or suffer from heightened sensitivity, it's better not to go into medicine at all. And especially not surgery. People came to them in all sorts of conditions. But that didn't stop everyone from helping. There's something important, to save a human life or at least ease existence. And something secondary, all the rest. Such simple principles greatly helped Marge be a good doctor and love her job. She had just started to fall asleep when suddenly someone lightly touched her hand. Standing before her was that same exotically dressed elderly woman. She had approached so silently that it was as if she had materialized out of thin air. "I also wanted to tell you not to rush when the plane lands. You know, I can see the future and want to help you," Antoinette said, giving a meaningful look with her piercing brown eyes. Now it's clear why she looks like she came from the last century. She's one of those whose life is so unbearable that she invents a better reality for herself. All these fortune tellers, magicians, and other chosen unfortunate people couldn't manage this world and left for an imaginary one, just like children. Only others are messing with their heads with their nonsense, Marge sighed. Patients also came to their department who suffered from such clairvoyance. They thought they were healed by supposedly bright energy. That's why they delayed seeking medical help. There were quite a few such cases. Yes, all right. Marge, of course, had no intention of asking her to tell fortunes or anything like that. She already had enough problems in her life, and she wanted to stay with a clear mind. Not to escape into an illusory world. But still, she didn't refuse out of politeness. This lady was already unhappy, sick, and something had happened with her daughter. Well, what to do? There are people with such peculiarities in this world. Antoinette left. Marge closed her eyes again. Falling asleep was no longer possible. Strangely, the touch of the woman who had awakened her triggered a chain of memories. Suddenly, she saw herself as a little gray-eyed girl about to enter first grade. In her hands, a huge bouquet of asters. Mom had intentionally brought the most beautiful ones from grandmother's dacha. Marge, you're already so grown up. You're going to school. I'm proud of you. Mom had also prepared a fancy dress. Mom, the girl hesitated. She knew that Mom didn't like when she asked about Dad, since he had left the family forever. That's what Grandmother had said. But Marge couldn't understand. Do ex-daughters even exist in the world? She was still waiting for him. And Dad hadn't called even once. It had been a year since he was heard from, not a word. What, my dear? Mom asked, adjusting her already perfect hairstyle. Is Dad not coming today? He was at the last birthday. The daughter lowered her eyes. It was not just Knowledge Day, but also her personal holiday. He had given her a present then, congratulated her, and disappeared forever. And he had said that she was his princess, and he would never abandon her, always be by her side. That's why dads are needed in the world. Marge, listen, you know, it's complicated. Mom sat on her knees in front of her. Tears were in her eyes. It was clear her daughter had made her suffer again, but Marge couldn't not ask. Just tell me, did he get divorced and from me too? Won't he come anymore? The girl asked. She couldn't stay in a state of suspense any longer, it was killing her. Clarity was needed, any clarity, even if very sad. Marge, I don't know. You see, he said it was hard for him to see us. Dad fell in love with another aunt, but I think he hardly stopped loving you. Marge understood that Mom was lying. She had clearly heard how Grandmother had yelled. This bastard should at least send money. But no, he ran away, and remember, what was her name? And I told you. Mom, in response, was making excuses and crying, and Marge didn't understand why. It was Dad who acted badly and dishonestly. But Mom loved him, cared for him. Why then, according to Grandmother, was Dad cheerful and didn't care about anything? So Mom, crying, was making excuses. And she had taken a second job and was always tired. I understand, Mom, even if Dad comes, we shouldn't hope for him. He's unreliable, right? If he betrayed us, he'll keep doing so. The girl repeated words overheard from Grandmother. Marge, well, this is how it is. But you have me. And we'll cope and be happy. We don't need a dad for that. You and I are already a family, you know? Mom kissed her on both cheeks and cried even more. The daughter, hugging her with her thin arms, also burst into tears. So they sat on the floor, embracing each other, mourning their sorrow. And they forever learned the lesson that in this life, you should only rely on each other. Then Marge washed herself with cold water and pretended that everything was fine. Mom did the same. And a new life began, without Dad. Now no one here waited for him anymore. Strangely enough, she felt better then. An honest confession became her gift for that birthday. That day there was no luxurious table as usual. Everything was modest. But at Marge's birthday, there were only those whom you could trust, Mom and Grandmother. However, Dad called late in the evening when she had already gone to bed. Marge, it's Dad. Can you come to the phone? Mom asked. Does he need something urgent? The girl really wanted to rush to the phone, but realized it was wrong, since he couldn't even call during the day. She even thought that he deliberately wanted to humiliate them. Avalon, Marge is asking if something is urgent. Mom relayed what her father already heard on the loudspeaker. Then she said. He hung up. Probably got offended. Good for him, muttered Grandmother, who was clearing the table. And Marge agreed with her. 2 years later, Mom married a good man, a doctor. Uncle Don loved her, and life became much easier. They went to the theater, the zoo, and many other places. Don worked as a surgeon and talked a lot about his profession. Can I do it too? Marge once asked him. Well, I don't know. It takes talent and perseverance, but you can always try, Uncle Don replied. She became passionate about becoming a doctor. She also wanted to save people and do good. Stepfather supported her, saying the idea was good. And Mom was happy that they had found common ground. Uncle Don adopted her. Marge started calling him Dad Don. She just couldn't bring herself to call him Dad. She had some bad associations with that word, especially since her father had tried to return to them several times. His business failed, and his mistress kicked him out. So he periodically pursued Mom, lurking by the entrance, convincing her that decent women don't cheat on their businessman husbands. And he was always rough around the edges. He also tried to tell Marge something about a daughter's duty. But the girl was already a teenager then and said to him, "You know what? Before demanding something, you have to invest something. I already have a father. And don't you dare bother Mom, or I'll complain about him." Betrayer. How are you talking to your father? I see it's time to teach you a lesson. He grabbed her by the hair right in the yard. Fortunately, stepfather was returning from work and quickly explained in a manly way that he should not show up anymore. This had an effect. Dad no longer bothered them. For some time, his mother called, who had previously managed to forget about them, but now remembered. She said something like, "How could this be? Am I the only one who should bear this cross? He moved in with me, drinking everything. Why should I have to endure this? Ida, you yourself said that a simple manicurist is not a match for your businessman son. So I'm not meddling with your noble family anymore. Please, leave us alone, be so kind," Mom said. Later, Dad moved to the countryside, recovered, and worked there as a carpenter. He married a widowed mother of many children, and she kept him busy, not allowing him to drink. In short, he found his motivator and the meaning of life in the form of a strict wife who could also give him a good beating. Everyone sighed with relief. And when Marge grew up, she entered medical school. It immediately became clear that she had great talent. By the time she became a surgeon, her stepfather had already retired. He was much older than Mom, and still celebrated Marge's successes and occasionally offered advice. However, she was unlucky in her personal life. While studying, she had a fiancé, Dee. But he turned out to be a womanizer. No matter how much she disliked him, Marge broke up with him immediately. He kept coming up with things, introducing her to different girls every month and saying, "Don't think about it, she's just a friend." But his eyes sparkled like a vampire's, thirsting to drink her blood. He hoped she would become jealous, but Marge escaped from that web. No matter how charming Dee was initially, if he started like that, it would never end well. She later found out she was right. Dee had been married about 5 times, at least officially. In each marriage, he left a child and then ran off further in life. It was good that she avoided such a fate. Her current husband, Sam, worked at the hospital as a driver and seemed to her a quite serious, reliable person. Marge wasn't bothered by the fact that he didn't have higher education. It wasn't the main thing in a family. Tall, stocky brunette with brown eyes, he seemed carved from wood. Muscular, strong, of a rural breed. He appeared to embody reliability. Marge thought she could love such a man. During their acquaintance, Sam was delicate, silent, unobtrusive. And Marge liked his mom too. She was also a laconic, calm woman. She had said when they met, "Sam is lucky. He met a serious wife." Marge worked a lot, and Sam was always there. Wherever she went, he was already there. During lunch breaks, he treated her to coffee, saw her off after work, and invited her somewhere on weekends. In general, it somehow happened that she didn't have a choice. Sam took up all her space. She was already 26. And she thought, why seek goodness for goodness' sake? Fate found her on its own. Moreover, she felt good and peaceful with Sam. And he constantly talked about children. And she dreamed of them too. "Marge, we've been going around in circles for 2 years now. Always together. Let's get married." He proposed to her early in the morning, before a working day, and handed her a ring. Modest but beautiful. "Yes, indeed, it's time to settle down," Marge agreed with him. She was a bit sorry that there were no bursts of passion, bright flashes, or anything like that. Everything was calm, steady, as if they were already retirees who decided that together was more convenient. It seemed he didn't even say at the time that he loved her, but Marge was just happy about that. Then he would have asked in return how she felt about him. She didn't like to lie. But the truth was, he probably wouldn't have liked her. Marge was attracted to him. She felt good with him and hoped to spend her entire life with him, and gradually fall in love. Moreover, she trusted him and thought he would be a good father for their children. She believed that Sam would embellish and make her life easier, and she would do the same for him. They would become each other's support. But she didn't love him yet. It was, so to speak, an advance of trust that still needed to be earned. Her father had once too much undermined her faith in the love between two people, and even stepfather couldn't fully heal that wound. "Daughter, why do you want to get married if you're not sure yet? Now is such a time when there's no need to rush. No grandmother will tell you that the clock is ticking. You should wait for your little man." Mom was upset that Marge was getting married simply to a reliable man who was more or less likable. "Mom, you love Dad, and you married stepfather because he turned out to be reliable. Who are you luckier with?" the daughter asked. "Oh, Marge, it's completely different. We married your father when we were very young. It was more passion than love. But now, I have fallen in love with Don wholeheartedly. And from the very beginning, I respected him, knew he was an exceptionally decent person. Can you say something like that about Sam?" Marge's suitor did not like her mother very much upon meeting. He asked too many questions about what they were planning to give her as a dowry. Marge was also not very thrilled by it, but she thought that it was unlikely she should demand much from Sam. Mom raised him alone, as best as she could. She worked, had no time to particularly raise him. They lived poorly in a dormitory room. So it was not surprising that he was so concerned about everything material. "Mom, I want to have a child, and Sam, he's not bad, but he just doesn't know how to present himself. And I feel calm with him," Marge replied. "Oh, all right. Do as you see fit. You always have somewhere to come back to. Know that." Mom hugged her. "Thank you, Mommy. You don't even realize how important this is." Tears appeared in Marge's eyes. Grandmother and mother really always did everything for her happiness. Not everyone in life got such a treasure. When she became an adult, she realized how lucky she was. Marge finally got married. They took a mortgage on an apartment. Marge paid for most of it, but she didn't blame her husband. It's not about money. They lived the first year well, but then Marge started to worry why she couldn't get pregnant. She underwent a bunch of examinations, all in vain. Sam noticed that his wife felt uncomfortable without a child and decided to pressure her on her weak spot. He started to say something like, "Yes. Now it's clear why a great surgeon has lowered herself to being a driver. And Mom was always amazed, thought I was lucky." "You blew me up, Marge," Sam said with a sly and foolish look. In what sense, she didn't understand at first. Don't pretend you don't understand. You're a dummy, so you shouldn't pretend these attempts to get pregnant. I'm not that stupid, even though I didn't finish college, her husband replied unexpectedly. Marge was stunned. She couldn't understand, was Sam really that foolish? Does he really think she would lie about such matters? This outraged her. "Listen, I hope you're joking. Because if not, we should get divorced. Don't portray me as some deceiver." She declared this loudly right into his right ear. On his left side, he couldn't hear well due to an untreated ear infection. Sam looked at his angry wife with surprise. Previously, Marge had never reacted like that to his statements. She swallowed everything, so he decided to turn up, so to speak, the heat. Sam wasn't that mean, he just liked to dominate even over trivial things. For example, if his wife was in a good mood, he tried to bring her down to earth, say some petty insult about dark circles under her eyes or something like that. He thought he needed to press Marge's weak spots, so to speak, preventively, otherwise she might really find someone better. Sam felt he wasn't that smart and not very successful in his career. So he tried to equalize their chances or even elevate himself a bit above his wife. And he wasn't in a big hurry with children, but he knew it was important for his wife. So he decided to press the painful, vulnerable spot. And she got so angry. Who would have thought? Marge, all right, don't get upset. I'm not serious, I just made an unfortunate joke. Sam hurried to apologize. I can joke like that too. I'll just divorce you if you say something like that again. I don't want to live with someone who thinks I'm a liar, she replied. Come on, you're not a pushover. You said something stupid. Why are you angry over something trivial? You're kind of difficult. Sam went to another room to keep the peace so as not to further anger his wife. Year after year, she got to know her husband more and more and became disappointed. There were no serious dramas, just that he was becoming increasingly petty, even jealous and boorish, not keeping his promises, being rude over small things, and saying nonsense, passing it off as universal wisdom. A few more years passed. The crack between Marge and her husband was growing larger. Then she thought that they should take a child, even if from an orphanage. Sam was not opposed. Then a suitable opportunity arose. She was operating on a single mother as part of a medical team, but they couldn't save the patient. And to be honest, there was almost no chance. A 7-year-old boy remained. Marge tried to arrange guardianship over him. The child also hoped that everything would work out. It was not only about the sense of guilt towards his mother, who was also named Marge. Just a red-haired, curly boy with gray eyes somehow immediately seemed like a family member. And she had already gotten used to the idea that Kike would be her son. In general, everything was very complicated. 6 months ago, they paid off the mortgage, and then her husband started behaving strangely. He was delaying when he wanted, hinting that she was not alone in the world. Marge wouldn't have connected it with the paid-off debt, but somehow, being very drunk, Sam said, "I'll claim half of what we've earned together, so what? I have nothing to lose. Do you think I'll keep dancing around for you? That's it, now you're taking care of me." Marge, of course, understood that he was drunk and might be saying some nonsense, but still, she was offended. "Listen, what are you even saying? I cook, do the laundry, I haven't said a bad word to you. In what way are you dancing around me? Did you live with me only for this apartment?" Marge couldn't even imagine in her worst nightmare that her husband was serious about this. Yes, their relationship was complicated, but it seemed like they had become close people. At least, to some extent. They even decided to adopt Kike. Now I'm starting to think. That's nice, I've been waiting for this for a long time. Keep in mind, women are perishable goods, and men, over the years, are like good cognac. Well, it gets stronger. Sam hiccuped. Your nonsense is getting stronger, and you need to drink less. We'll talk later, Marge waved her hand. But to her surprise, the talks about possible divorce and division of the apartment continued. Her husband constantly hinted that without him it would be much harder for her to adopt a child. And then there was Alistair, whom Marge clearly liked, who somehow hinted that her husband was having affairs, sometimes even at work. She had dismissed it, since it was clear that Alistair was just in love with her, so he was spreading rumors out of jealousy. But on the other hand, she couldn't get it out of her head. The paramedic was a decent person, and during voting he didn't hesitate to defend her. Well, could he be telling the truth? These thoughts were buzzing in Marge's head simultaneously with the engine of the flying machine, which was already landing. She never understood whether she managed to take a nap or all this time she was just turning unpleasant thoughts over in her head. She spun, wound up, everything seemed in dark tones. Apparently, she was just tired. Well, there are no perfect families, and there's nothing to be done about it. Marge dismissed her suspicion that her marital boat was falling apart and came to the conclusion that her husband was just a dull person who liked to talk nonsense. It's not worth making a mountain out of a molehill. She got up, took her bag, and left the plane. And when she was just starting to descend the ramp, she noticed Antoinette. An elderly woman waved to her warmly. It was clear that she was waiting for her on purpose, and Marge hoped so much that the strange passenger would forget her promise to repay with a prediction. "All right, I won't upset her. Let her say whatever she wants. I constantly hear all sorts of nonsense from Sam anyway." Apparently, fate is to be 3 years, Marge thought with a sigh. However, politely smiling, she approached the woman. "It's a pity you don't believe me. I see you're doubting. You almost think I'm crazy. And yet, give me your hand." Antoinette took her palms in hers. Then she suddenly shook and began to fall. She would have crashed directly onto the pavement if Marge hadn't caught her. She couldn't hold the large woman, but at least softened the fall, and under the weight of her body, sat down right beside the ramp, resting Antoinette's head on her knees. "Call an ambulance," Marge shouted. People hurried around. Someone dialed the emergency number. Marge decided not to abandon her new acquaintance and wait for help. She didn't understand what had caused the fainting spell. It looked as if an electric shock had passed through Marge. She touched her and collapsed. To top it all off, she was already late for the symposium, which didn't bode well. Punctuality was not forgiven in the medical community. No, if you were some kind of star, you might still get away with it, and even then, it wasn't advisable if you didn't want to be seen as arrogant. For ordinary surgeons, being late meant they might never be sent to such an event again, and they would also receive a reprimand for the tardiness. She had come not to entertain herself, but to work. The emergency doctors were delayed through no fault of their own. It was simply impossible to reach the airplane ramp instantly. So it took almost 25 minutes to take Antoinette to the hospital. "It's good that you provided first aid. We were worried," the doctor said. "Yes, we met on the plane. By the way, I'm your colleague. I couldn't leave her. You and Antoinette be careful, she's a bit odd. She considers herself a fortune teller or something like that." Marge clarified the coordinates of the hospital where her new acquaintance was being taken. Then she was about to call and ask if she was okay. Marge felt some sense of responsibility. Antoinette had felt unwell in her presence twice already. She couldn't remain indifferent. In life, nothing seems to happen by chance. As a surgeon, she knew this especially well. Marge called a taxi. The driver tried very hard to get her there as quickly as possible since she had promised to pay extra if he got her there on time. But although the driver knew the city well and tried to avoid all possible traffic jams, he didn't have the skill to stretch time. The truth was that reaching the desired hour was simply impossible no matter how hard he tried. If only she hadn't been flying by helicopter, she would have made it in time. That's what the upset driver reported. However, she still gave him the bonus. He tried, after all. When Marge entered the hall where the event had already started, an icy silence fell. Her colleagues looked at her with a kind of contempt. Like, she's a show-off. Less than a year into her position, and she's already allowing herself to be late. Probably starstruck after several successful surgeries. This happens with young surgeons. What do you think of yourself? The secretary said to her during the break, adding with a frown, "There are more important people here, but they arrived on time. We will tell everything to your superiors. Don't hope that this will slide." "Well, it's not my fault. We had an accident upon arrival," Marge tried to justify herself, but the secretary didn't even listen, only gave a disdainful smirk, as if, "We've heard these stories, no need to make up excuses." The day went terribly. Colleagues interacted with her, so to speak, through pursed lips. She felt like a guilty schoolgirl, but didn't make any more excuses. She realized they wouldn't believe her anyway. Everyone had already decided that she was just an arrogant show-off. And they were not ready to accept any other version. All right, it's only the first day. There's still time to improve relationships. The first pancake is always a flop, Marge thought. She went to the hotel and booked the simplest room there to at least somewhat atone for her mistake. No one would say she was spending too much of the budget. After having a small snack, she decided to visit the hospital. Over the phone, they said that Antoinette had woken up and was feeling fine. There was suspicion of something more serious. They even took a brain scan, fearing she had a concussion from the fall. But fortunately, it was just a fainting spell. "Antoinette, what happened to you again? How are you feeling?" Marge asked the fortune teller. She looked her straight in the eyes, then sighed and averted her gaze. She remained silent for a few minutes. "I'm sorry for what I'm about to say, but since you've come," she coughed and reluctantly continued, "do you remember I told you about my daughter? Also named Marge." Marge nodded but didn't understand what that had to do with anything, though she didn't interrupt. "So, my daughter didn't want to live with me. She felt that my predictions were taking the happiness out of her future, if I may put it that way. She said everything was going wrong because of me. Maybe she was right. In short, my daughter gave me an ultimatum: either I stop, as she said, associating with dark forces, or she would no longer communicate with me." "And what did you answer her?" Marge asked. Antoinette understood her daughter very well. She herself wouldn't like it if someone close to her were predicting the future. Who knows what visions such people might have? And some people believe them and then have to answer for their words. Marge would never diagnose someone just because something seemed off to her. Everyone can make mistakes. She thought this but didn't voice her thoughts aloud. "Right now, I would agree to anything as long as my daughter stays with me. But that made me very angry. The thing is, her father abandoned us. I pulled myself together as best as I could. I didn't shy away from any work. I even took up fortune telling. And it hurt me that my Marge considered this money unclean. I asked her, would it have been better if we had perished, starved to death? We didn't even have a place to live. And she said it would be better. So, word by word, we said very hurtful things to each other. I kept thinking she would come to her senses, but I never saw her again." The woman sighed. "So, do I look like your daughter? Is that why you felt bad?" Marge asked. She suddenly thought that not only the name might match, but the appearance could be similar as well. "Oh, I see. No, my daughter didn't look like you. It's just that there, on the plane, I felt that there was a woman nearby who was indirectly involved in her death. And when I touched your hand by the ramp, I saw you standing next to her body again," Antoinette confessed and fell silent. Marge was left stunned. She couldn't understand whether this unfortunate woman was delirious or if it could all be true. "Actually, I'm a surgeon. A lot of people pass through me. Let's do this. Give me your Marge's last name and patronymic, and preferably the exact date of birth. And I'll find out if I had someone like her in my surgeries. Then I'll inform you honestly." Marge decided that it was indeed worth checking. Even if Antoinette was wrong, she needed to tell her. What if there was some truth in her words? Well, such cases do happen. Just not often, but still. "Please, just don't lie to me, I beg you. I dreamed of my daughter when I fell asleep on the plane. She said I must quit fortune telling if I find her son, otherwise he will be in trouble too. And I promised her." The elderly woman cried. "Well, if you really have abilities, you should have seen that I never lie." "I always keep my word," Marge said. Strangely enough, after these words, Antoinette looked at her trustingly, like a child. "Certainly, here's the translation of your text into English. Yes, you are telling the truth. You won't deceive me. Then I will wait for you, very much, you understand?" The woman grabbed Marge's hand as if her life depended on it. And Marge promised that she would find out everything as soon as possible without delay. She was curious to know whether this Antoinette was crazy, or if there was at least a kernel of truth in her words. Marge possessed the gift of deeply sensing people and had not lost it in the harsh medical reality. So she could be certain that Antoinette was not pretending right now. She was truly suffering deeply. Maybe even on the verge of madness. And Marge felt sympathy for her, wanting to help. That same evening, she turned to her colleagues to help clarify the information. And the next day she knew that Antoinette had not gone mad at all. At least, not yet. She had indeed operated with other colleagues on the daughter of this woman. Last name, first name, patronymic, date of birth, all matched. And most of all, Marge was shocked that the fortune teller's dream was also true. She had a grandson. And it was that very kike whom Marge had been trying to adopt. Indeed, their meeting was apparently not a coincidence. Marge barely waited until the end of the second day of the symposium. She was so shaken that it didn't matter at all who and how would criticize her for being late or something else. Maybe it worked, because no one else made any comments. She even caught a glimpse of someone muttering, "She's not quite herself. Maybe she has problems at home?" In the evening, Marge flew to the hospital like on wings. And she told them that Antoinette indeed had a grandson. And she didn't hide her entire story connected with this either. Marge was most afraid that her new acquaintance would faint again, but Antoinette just hugged her and cried softly. "So, your daughter was telling the truth. My grandson's name is Kike. I will stop fortune-telling, start washing floors, do anything, but I will not break my word. Listen, first of all, you need to get better. And I will stay in touch, and if we manage to adopt Kike, you will see him often." "I promise," Marge said. Antoinette said that due to poor health and poverty, she would not be able to take her grandson despite her desire. Even her former relative paid for this ticket for her. She had flown in for the funeral of her husband, the father of her daughter. But she didn't make it. However, she didn't regret it. Antoinette kept complaining that she couldn't take her grandson to a dormitory and make him live on meager funds. But finally, through her hysterics, she heard Marge's words that she herself would adopt Kike. And she had long made such a decision. Marge had an apartment, a husband, and a reliable job. "Oh, how stupid I am. You're telling me, and I'm not listening." "I'm sorry," Antoinette said. And Marge thought that she should really strengthen her health. Her nerves were shaken, and her body was weakened. And then such a shock. Marge's own hands were still trembling, not to mention an elderly mother who lost her daughter. Moreover, also the fortune teller. Marge decided to get acquainted with Antoinette's attending physician, and she immediately liked this Homer. A plump, rosy-haired brunette with brown eyes, short in stature, he was good-natured and cheerful. "Don't worry, everything will be fine with the patient." "Is she your relative?" he asked. "Well, I hope she will get better." Marge was lost in her thoughts about whether she would be able to adopt Kike. But then, noticing the doctor's surprised look, she said, "We just have a complicated story, too long to explain. But come in for a coffee. I have just the time. Recently, I met a colleague from another city. I would be very glad." Homer offered her some cookies that he had baked himself. He said he had gone through an unpleasant divorce. He worked and did all the housework, but his wife found him boring. She left him for someone with a passionate look. However, the look wasn't burning for no reason. She discovered that her new husband was unfaithful and divorced him. She even wanted to come back, but somehow she didn't want to spend her whole life on the bench. Yes, I understand you perfectly. As for Antoinette and me, we met in a rather strange way. She is a fortune teller. Well, she was one, but now she seems to have decided to quit. Marge told everything without unnecessary details. Oh, she even told me that I would soon meet my real brother. But it's unlikely to happen. Actually, my mother gave birth to me via donor through IVF. She became disillusioned with men, Homer confessed. Well, I think you should be more understanding towards Antoinette. She has been through a lot. As for me, because of that incident at the airport, I was late to the symposium. Now everyone thinks I'm a show-off, sighed Marge, and she explained that the secretary had indeed called her at work, and now they had promised to reprimand her and even withhold her bonus for this incident. She kind of portrayed everyone in a bad light. She did not live up to the high trust. There's no need to worry so much. You are a good surgeon, you won't be left without work. By the way, we need a specialist of your qualification. The chief physician even promised that if he finds a professional, he will make them the head of the department. So, if you are interested, I will introduce you to Sophia. We have a world-class chief physician. No favoritism based on acquaintance or degree of kinship, Homer offered. Well, I'll keep that in mind. However, I'm not ready for such drastic changes. It means moving apartments and all that, and I need to consult with my husband, sighed Marge. At the mention of husband, Homer became gloomy, but nevertheless invited Marge to come visit him and chat as often as possible. It was clear that she had made an impression on him. The next day, Marge was preparing to present at the symposium and smooth over the unpleasant impressions. She couldn't sleep. Everything seemed like the presentation would fall apart. Although, what could go wrong? She knew by heart what she was going to talk about. In the end, she arrived at the event 2 hours early and waited in the lobby with a cup of coffee from the machine. This time, she definitely couldn't be late for any reason, but she was still scared. Marge was the first to present. People had already started gathering. See, nothing happened. Oh, those nerves were shaken in vain, Marge thought with relief. She was about to turn off her phone so that no one would be disturbed by random calls or messages when suddenly the device in her hand dinged. The sound was unsettling, anxious, resonating deep into her heart. She thought, maybe something urgent. She decided to quickly check the message. Slowly, a high-resolution photo appeared before her eyes. First, someone's knees in jeans, with legs and stockings on top. Then other details of this scene unfolded. Her husband himself was holding a brand new nurse on his knees, and it was all happening right in the parking lot. Good luck with your presentation. Don't worry about anything. Then there were 3 smiley emojis. The message was from Carla. Marge gasped and sat down on a bench in front of the hall entrance. She grabbed her heart and turned pale. Are you going to present today? The secretary asked sternly. She had already decided to herself that Marge was a suspicious person, always throwing out some knees or making faces. She couldn't just be like all the normal people, always needing to attract attention. What? Present? Marge didn't even understand at first what she was talking about. Her life was falling apart, and she had forgotten about work. She had no idea where she was. Here's the thing, my dear, if you don't go now, it's on you. The secretary demonstratively stepped forward, marching almost militarily on the polished parquet floor. Oh, the presentation. Right. Marge entered the hall, staggering. Where should I go? They handed her a microphone and looked at her in surprise. Actually, today all the presentations were in a round table format, just like the 2 days before. She took out a piece of paper and began to read something from it. Her words got tangled. Laughter erupted. Marge said, Sorry, I'm not feeling well. I'm very sorry, colleagues. Of course, health comes first. And we still have many more presentations. One of the kind-hearted doctors even helped her get into a taxi and escorted her to the hotel. He saw that Marge was truly not herself. Moreover, he insisted that her blood pressure be checked, and when they saw how much it had spiked, he insisted that she just rest at the hotel and then go straight home. If it gets worse, call immediately. It's just a presentation. Don't worry so much. Life happens. Marge was grateful to him. She hadn't even remembered his name, so shaken was she by that message. So, I don't have a husband. It turns out Sam wasn't joking about being ready to divorce. He doesn't love me, doesn't respect me. These questions tormented her. Marge already understood that it was indeed true, but she wanted to hope that she was wrong. Carla couldn't stand her. What if it was Photoshop, a forgery? Something like that. It might turn out that it was all not true, and Carla just wanted to sabotage her presentation. That would be great. The next day she had to get ready to go home. Marge called Homer. I won't be able to stop by today. I need to return urgently. But as soon as Antoinette gets better, I'll help transfer her to my city. Her grandson lives there. Of course, don't worry. I'll call you back right away. Your voice sounds kind of strange. Maybe you need help? Homer asked. I don't know yet, but I'll find out soon. Homer didn't understand what she meant, but he asked her to call him in any difficult situation. He said that she could always count on him. At the same time, Sam also didn't know what to do with his wife. Carla had already reported with a satisfied look that she had set him up by sending the photo with Nellie. But why did she do that, huh? Now something had to be urgently decided. Either apologize or get a divorce. And pretend that it was planned all along. He didn't understand her at all. Marge wasn't angry because he earned less, didn't help around the house like others. Instead, he fought for some silly principles and nitpicked her words. She was complicated. Well, never mind. Besides, if it weren't for Marge, he wouldn't be living in such a nice apartment with renovations. And his wife cooked deliciously. Smart, again. And if they have children, maybe they would like her. But would they have children at all? It seemed she was fixated on the orphan child. And feeding the cuckoo wasn't part of Sam's plans. He had simply agreed, for show. Hoping that over time she would abandon this idea. And so, this was also an argument in favor of divorcing her. She hadn't changed her mind. But on the other hand, Marge wasn't some meddling, nosy person. Loyal, honest. Sam knew that for sure. And she treated his mother with great respect. Although she was just a cleaning lady. In general, his wife had many virtues. She didn't count every penny. And she was quite pretty. They say such slender, petite birds are made for love. And Marge also worked hard. Sam liked that rhyme. Another point in his favor. And the mortgage was already paid off. Marge had almost completely paid it off. He would get half the apartment just for free. And he could brag to new girlfriends that he earned it himself. He wouldn't have to live with his mother. With the money from a luxurious 3-room apartment in the center with renovations, he could buy a 1-bedroom flat. Well, let it be on the outskirts, but maybe even a 2-bedroom, if he was lucky. Without renovations and a Khrushchev-era building, but still. And then he could bring any dolls home, and no one would say a word. This was an argument against Marge staying his wife. So why did Carla meddle in his affairs? Otherwise, she would never have found out anything. Marge didn't rummage through his phone at all, didn't suspect, but she should have. Because Sam was not averse to partying sometimes, but did everything carefully, not intending to display it. And yet, he slipped up, lost caution. He didn't think someone would be prowling and photographing at such an hour. Now he had to figure out a way to get out of it. Why should I, actually, have to apologize? When Marge met me, I was poor, unhappy, and living with my mother in a dorm. And now I'm a solid man, with my own almost 1-bedroom or even 2-bedroom flat. And I could sue for part of the joint savings. Marge is unlikely to negotiate. She's unlikely to even remember that it's actually her money because Sam usually spent his own money on unclear things. No, she's not petty. Sam said this aloud, and he himself was surprised by the obviousness of the decision. Yes, we need to separate. And that was also an argument against staying in the marriage. And it became the deciding factor. Marge had nothing to regret. If he continued to pretend that nothing had happened, maybe he would change his mind. But as soon as she uttered a single word against him, it was over. Forever. She had lost him. When Marge returned home, of course, she didn't stay silent. She threw a complete tantrum, even breaking several plates on her husband's foolish and insolent head. Sam decided he couldn't tolerate this abuse of his personality and threw a plate at her as well. Go ahead and divorce me today. Yes, I did. And not only with that nurse. And what are you going to do to me? The mortgage is already paid off. We will divide everything. It was then that Marge realized she had been living with a cunning opportunist all this time. Sam hadn't been joking about not having to fear anything now that the apartment was owned by him. Oh, so you're one of those fools obsessed with real estate? It doesn't matter how you got it, right? Doesn't matter that you didn't earn it. Do you even have any pride or conscience? Marge asked. This had no effect on her husband. He only responded with a contemptuous grimace. It's you, idiot. Didn't you see what's going on right under your nose? I'm not going to feed your orphan child. And I'm tired of your moralizing. There are normal, cheerful women who aren't a burden. You know what? Get out of my apartment. I'll file for divorce myself, Marge shouted. Go ahead and leave yourself. We will divide everything, Sam yelled back. She was supposed to go to work, so she decided to postpone the conversation. At the hospital, the displeased chief physician was already waiting for her. The secretary had reported her inappropriate behavior at the symposium. And Carla, his niece, had even stirred things up. So Brad was furious and shouting. You will receive a reprimand. You will lose your bonus, and you will never attend any events in your life again. But that's illegal. I have reasons and I have evidence. Marge tried to explain the situation. You're not in school. Maybe your parents will write an explanation. Look. You've disgraced everyone, and don't show your face around here anytime soon, Brad roared. Why are you talking to me like that? Who gave you the right? Marge tried to say these words convincingly, but in the end, she barely whispered them. You can write to someone else. Complain, the boss responded arrogantly. The chief physician knew that Marge couldn't prove anything, so he wasn't afraid to insult her. Let her know her place. In the evening, when she returned home, she discovered that her husband had changed the locks. Marge didn't give up. She called the police, and they opened the door. They looked at her like she was crazy. They advised her to sort things out herself, or next time they would issue a fine. This added more stress to her already exhausted psyche. Sam, however, didn't care. He got drunk and, out of spite, turned on loud music and said that tomorrow, when she came home, he would already have a mistress living with him. So what? He had the right. You should have respected me, screamed this clown, considering himself a real man and the master of the house. Marge didn't respond. She realized that arguing with an idiot would make no difference between them. She couldn't elevate him to her level. But Sam could easily bring her down to his. The power was unequal, and she had been living with this man for 5 years. Perhaps she even needed to be thankful to Carla for opening her eyes. The next day, Marge was on edge. She had made a mistake during surgery by not applying the clamp in time. Carla did it for her, with a triumphant look. I should be in the position of senior surgeon. If I hadn't been there, the patient would have lost a lot of blood. You're just a walking disaster. You have no place here. Carla reported the situation to the chief physician the same day. Marge didn't try to deny it and took unpaid leave. In some ways, Carla was right. You can't endanger patients because of personal issues. Marge, I know everything about your relationship with your husband. Sorry, he himself talks to everyone about how he gets you worked up. I was trying to warn you before. Alistair offered her to stay temporarily in his rented apartment. It's better to divorce him quietly and calmly. I'll stay with a friend for now. I think you'll go crazy if this continues. Oh, thank you. I really don't have the strength to keep fighting. How about this? I'll compensate you with money for the rent, agreed. Marge asked. Well, if you really want to, but I would appreciate it if you just let me help you, the paramedic said. She filed for divorce and began communicating with Sam only through a lawyer. She herself moved to a rented place, trying to decide what to do next. Alistair visited her, bought groceries, and took care of her in every way. At first, Marge was afraid that the paramedic would harass her or become intrusive. But nothing like that happened. Alistair didn't hide that he liked her, but he made it clear that he was willing to wait as long as needed. Moreover, he would accept any of her decisions. She became much calmer. Her hands and legs stopped shaking, and her blood pressure began to normalize. Then, about a week later, Homer called. "Marge, I don't know how to react, so I'll just tell you everything as it is. Antoinette is acting strange. She says she has a vision. You and Kike need to move here. Her ex-husband left her the apartment, and he never had children except for their daughter. So, that's definitely true. As for the rest, you understand, I can't vouch for it. Homer, I have so many problems here. Trouble at work, divorce. In general, everything is going full throttle. Tell her that I just don't have the strength to deal with it right now. And I don't believe in any of this. I think she just has nerve problems," Marge replied. "Here's the thing. You remember that we have a place for you? If you don't want to live with Antoinette, I'm waiting for you to visit. Just remember me," Homer said. He became very animated upon hearing about the divorce. "Yes, thank you, but everything passes so quickly. I need to think." That's all Marge could tell him. Her head was spinning. Only one thing was clear, that nothing was clear at all. And it seemed that this fortune teller had triggered a mad cycle. And she happened to meet her on the plane. In the evening, Alistair came by. "Marge, listen, I don't want to upset you any further, but I accidentally overheard that Brad is trying to set you up. He and Carla are planning to slip an inoperable patient to you. They've already cleaned his record. If you take the case, there will be serious charges. I think you shouldn't return from vacation tomorrow." The orderly recorded the conversation between the chief physician and his niece on his phone so that Marge would have no doubts. The next day, she submitted her resignation. What happened? It didn't seem so bad, did it? Well, mistakes happen, everyone makes them. Why react like this? Brad was deceitfully trying to dissuade her. Apparently, he couldn't wait to ruin her reputation. I was offered a promotion. I don't want to pass it up. Of course, everything was fine, but I need to build a career. Marge left her boss perplexed. He tried to ask where she would be working, but Marge decided not to say anything. After all, I was wrong to be angry with Antoinette. These weren't fantasies. She really wanted to protect me, Marge thought. On the day of her resignation, she also received good news. They informed her that she could become the guardian of a boy. Finally! It couldn't move from the deadlock for so long. This was clearly a sign. Alistair, seeing them off with Kike at the airport, asked, "Will we see each other again?" She looked at him and, through his gaze, understood he was saying goodbye to her almost forever. She didn't believe they would see each other again. "I don't know yet," Marge replied honestly. There was still too much to resolve. She liked Alistair but didn't want to give him hope. She knew how seriously he felt about her. Antoinette was already waiting for Kike and Marge in the apartment that her late husband had bequeathed to her. This is how it turned out. He did a good deed after all. I took it only for Kike. It will go to his grandson, the woman said. She hugged Kike and began to cry. Marge also couldn't hold back her tears. "Are you really a fortune teller?" the boy asked. "Not anymore. I promised your mother," Antoinette said. "But she died?" Kike was surprised. "Yes, but at one time she didn't like my craft. Because of that, we had a quarrel. It's a complicated story, I'll tell you when you're older. For now, would you like some pies?" Antoinette set the table and began to fuss like an ordinary grandmother. As if she had always known Kike. And the boy liked her immediately. He told Marge about it but clarified. "Are you still going to be my mom, okay?" "Of course," we agreed, she promised. Marge met Sophia, the chief doctor. She, as Homer had promised, took her under her wing immediately, appointing her as the head of the department. "But I haven't really shown myself yet." Marge was surprised. I've done background checks on you. And generally, I understand people. You'll do great, Sophia said. I also have an acquaintance who's a paramedic. He needs a job too, Marge said. Interesting, there's always a shortage of paramedics. I hope he doesn't drink? The chief doctor asked. No. Alistair works well. He's very responsible, Marge vouched for him. The day before, she called him. She asked if he would come if Marge found him a job here. And the young man, without a moment's hesitation, agreed. Alistair was indeed liked by everyone except Homer. The doctor began to be jealous of the new paramedic, who was clearly courting Marge. I saw him in my vision. He's your brother. Antoinette said when Homer came to visit her, you two shouldn't fight. Antoinette, you gave up on predictions, didn't you? Homer dismissed. He decided that the elderly woman invented this because she preferred Alistair for the role of Marge's fiancé. So she began to eliminate him as a rival. Yes, I gave up, but the vision was before my grandson arrived, Antoinette said, and advised getting an examination. Her last prediction turned out to be true. Homer and Alistair indeed had a common father. He had donated his genetic material to a data bank many years ago. So, they really turned out to be blood brothers. Homer suspected that Antoinette didn't tell him to stop fighting with his brother for no reason and hinted that it was in vain. So it all happened. When Marge recovered after the divorce, she began to show sympathy for Alistair, not for him. What to do? He had to accept it. For some time, Marge and Kike lived with Antoinette, and she gladly took care of the grandson. She even improved his health, but then Marge won the larger part of the apartment and savings from her ex-husband. The mother, to whom she entrusted all the payments, looked at it like water. She gathered all the certificates and receipts and proved that her daughter had the right to the larger part of the property. Sam, on the other hand, got mere pennies, and he missed them out of sorrow. Not everything, though. His lover stole part of them while he was drunk. And he had already gotten used to the idea that he would have his own apartment. Unlucky, he had to return to his mother in the dormitory. A year later, when Marge met Carla at the same symposium, she was already married and 3 months pregnant. So she decided not to worry. Well, she wouldn't get the grant, but it's okay. The main thing was that everything was fine in the family. And when Carla said something mean to her, some get everything, others get nothing. Marge thought wearily, well, okay, I'll manage. And only then did she realize that Carla wasn't angry for no reason. They announced Marge's surname. So, among those who got everything all at once, this time it was her. If you enjoyed the story, please support it with a like and a comment. All the best to you.